The mop hit the floor before anyone could blink. 1 second, he was just the maintenance guy, worn boots, gray uniform, invisible. The next, he was standing in the center of a martial arts studio, looking at a grown man who had just thrown a 14-year-old boy hard enough to make the floor shake. But he moved. Nobody said a word. And then the man in the maintenance uniform did something nobody in that room expected. He walked onto the mat. What happened next would be talked about in Coldwater Ridge for years. No, because of the fight, but because of that janitor turned out to be. If you're new here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay with me until the end, because this one hits different. The last bus out of downtown left at 9:47. Mason Hale knew that, because he'd watched it pull away from the stop across the street every single night for 2 years. He'd watch it go from the side entrance of the Black Ridge Community Center, one hand on the door handle, a half-empty coffee thermos in the other, listening to the diesel engine groan up the hill and disappear into the dark. It was his signal. Bus goes. Shift begins. He'd push through the door, grab the maintenance cart from the utility closet that smelled like pine sol and old rubber, and start at the east corridor. Bathrooms first, then the lobby tile, then the gymnasium floor if it needed it. He'd work west, slow and methodical, the way you work when you've got 6 hours and no reason to rush. Community center at night had its own kind of quiet, peaceful quiet, more like a breath quiet, like the building itself was just aimed for morning so people could come back and make noise again. The fluorescent tubes in the hallway hummed. The HVAC kicked on every 40 minutes. Somewhere in the back offices, a clock ticked that no one had ever bothered to sync to the right time. Mason didn't mind any of it. He'd lived in louder places. Much louder. He was 38 years old, like someone who had once trained very hard and then spent years letting that training settle into something quieter. Shoulders still broad, hands still rough, edge about him. See, nothing that announced itself. When people looked at Mason Hale, they saw a man doing a job. Single father pulling night shifts. Unremarkable. Kind of guy you nod at in the parking lot and forget by the time you reach your car. Was fine with him. Lily was asleep by 8:30 on school nights, which meant Mrs. Garland next door could watch her until Mason got home around 3. The arrangement had been going on since Lily was 6. She was 9, old enough to leave a light on and know her father would be back before sunrise. Paid Mrs. Garland in cash every Friday. He brought her a casserole on the first Sunday of every month, chicken and wild rice, the one dish he'd actually learned to make well. The old woman said it tasted like something her late husband used to make. Mason didn't ask for details. He just kept making it. That was his life. Clean the floors, pack the lunches, walk Lily to school on Tuesdays when the timing allowed, fix the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom that he'd been meaning to get to for 6 months. And every night around 11:15, he'd run his mop down the west corridor, past Studio B, the large mirrored room where Travis Kane ran his martial arts classes. The first time Mason noticed something wrong, it was a Tuesday in September. He'd been mopping near the studio door, which was propped open with a rubber wedge, because the exhaust fan in the room had broken and the building manager hadn't gotten around to fixing it. Mason could hear everything: the thump of bodies hitting the mat, the bark of instruction, the shuffle of feet. Again. You're too slow. Do it again. He'd glance through the gap in the door. A class of maybe 12 kids, ranging from 12 to 16, running a drill. Falling and rising. Falling and rising. Travis Kane was in the center of the room in a white gi, arms crossed, watching them the way a man watches something he owns. Travis was 32, maybe 33. Former competitive fighter, according to the framed photos that lined the wall just inside the studio entrance. He had the kind of face that had once been handsome and had since gone angular and hard. Jaw like a shelf. Eyes set too close together. Mason had noticed the way Travis moved through the space like he was the only real person in the room, and everyone else was just furniture he had to work around. He'd kept mopping. Wasn't his business. But he kept listening. "Parker, get up. Stop making that face. On my wrist." "Your wrist is fine. Get up." Mason had paused mid-stroke. Kid's voice. Young. Thin at the edges, the kind of thin that meant the kid was trying very hard not to sound like he was about to cry. He'd glanced through the gap again. A boy near the far wall, 14 or 15, on one knee. Skinny kid with elbows too sharp for his body. Brown hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Cradling his left wrist. Travis had walked toward him slowly, deliberately, the way a man walks when he wants the walk itself to be the threat. I said, "Get up." The boy got up. Mason had watched for another 30 seconds, then gone back to work. That night he told himself it wasn't his problem. The second time was early October. Same setup. Studio door propped open. Fluorescent light buzzing. Mason in the corridor with his cart, working slow. This time, it was the boy again, Parker. He'd heard the name enough times now to know it wasn't being used kindly. Had a way of saying Parker that turned the word into a sentence. A verdict. Parker, drop. Give me 20. Silence. I asked you something. I already did. We did push-ups before. I didn't ask you what we already did. I asked you to give me 20. The boy went down. Mason could hear it, the strained breathing, conflict, the count, the way the count started to slow around 15, and Travis's voice got quieter, which somehow made it worse. Slower and I'll make it 40. I'm trying. You're not trying. You're embarrassing yourself in front of the class. That night, Mason had stood in the corridor for longer than he should have. Long enough to see the other kids in the class avoid looking at Owen Parker, the way people avoid looking at someone getting publicly humiliated, not because they didn't care, but because watching felt like participating. He'd thought about knocking on the door, had even taken one step toward it. Then he'd stopped himself. He was maintenance. It wasn't his call. Parents in the viewing area. He could see their shape. There were kids he'd see through the narrow window, beside the door, sitting in the plastic chairs along the wall. He'd see what was happening. If they thought it crossed a line, they'd say something. He'd gone back to the mop. That was the thing about choosing a quiet life. You had to keep choosing it. The third time was October 23rd, and it was not a Tuesday. It was a Thursday evening, 7:40 p.m., and Mason was running early because Lily had a school event the next morning, and he'd told Mrs. Garland he'd try to get home by 2. He'd come in through the side door, grabbed his cart, and was working the east corridor when he heard the slam. Training slam. Not the controlled, practiced fall of a student learning how to go down safely. This was different. This was the sound of a body hitting a floor because someone put it there. Kind of sound that you recognize somewhere below your brain, in your gut, in some older part of you. Mason stopped walking. Then he heard the cry. High-pitched, cut off quickly, like the kid had caught himself, like he'd learned that making noise only made things worse. Mason's cart was still rolling. He let it go. He walked to Studio B. The door was closed tonight. Fan must have gotten fixed. Pushed it open and stood in the doorway. 22 people in the room. 12 students on the mat, ranging from preteen to mid-teen. 6 parents in the chair rail along the side wall. Travis Kane standing in the center, arms at his sides. 2 adult training assistants near the equipment rack, both big, both watching. Owen Parker was on his back on the mat, 7 feet from where he'd been standing. Left shoulder. Hit hard. Didn't look like he'd been ready for it. The boy wasn't moving. Travis looked up at the door. His expression said he was annoyed at the interruption. Class is in session. Mason stepped onto the mat. He crossed the room in 8 steps, lowered himself to one knee beside Owen, and put 2 fingers gently against the boy's collarbone. He said quietly, "Look at me." Owen's eyes found his. Dazed, lip trembling, trying very hard to pull it together. "Tell me what hurts." My shoulder. Can you squeeze my hand?" The boy squeezed. Weak, but there. "Okay. Stay down. Rush it." Mason looked up. Travis hadn't moved, but the temperature in the room had changed the way air changes before weather comes. The other students had stopped moving. Parents along the wall sat very still. "That's my student," Travis said. His voice was measured, controlled, the voice of a man used to being in charge of a room. "He's fine." Mason didn't respond. He was still watching Owen. The boy's color was coming back. Shoulder didn't look dislocated. "I said he's fine." "He'll be fine," Mason said without looking up. "In a couple minutes he needs to sit." The room was absolutely silent. Shuffling. No cough. Even the HVAC seemed to hold. Then Travis Kane walked toward them. He moved the way men with authority move when that authority has just been questioned, fast enough to show displeasure, slow enough to remain in control. He stopped 3 feet from Mason. "Who are you?" Mason finally stood up. He was about 2 inches shorter than Travis and 30 pounds lighter in visible muscle. He had a ring of keys on his belt and a name tag that said Mason Maintenance. "I work here." "Right. Maintenance." Travis said it the way you say a word in a foreign language you don't respect. "Get back to work." He got thrown too hard. It's a martial arts class. Contact happens. Contact and that are 2 different things. Travis's jaw tightened, very slightly. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. "I don't remember asking for your assessment. I don't remember charging for it." A breath. Somewhere in the parent section, someone shifted in their seat. Travis glanced at his students a quick look, but Mason clocked it. The man was performing now. He'd had his authority questioned in front of an audience, and that changed the math. This wasn't about Owen Parker anymore. "You need to leave," Travis said. "After he's sitting up, and someone's checked that shoulder. He's going to be fine." "You said that already." Mason's voice hadn't changed. "Same volume, same pace, and I heard you. I'm asking you to wait 2 minutes and make sure." The vein on the left side of Travis's neck. That's where the anger was going. "You clean this place," Travis said. He said it slow. "Let it land. You mop floors. You empty trash cans. And right now, you're standing on my mat in front of my students, questioning how I run my class." He looked Mason up and down. "You want to rethink that?" Mason looked at the man for a moment. Then he looked down at Owen, who had made it up to one elbow, watching. "What's your name?" Mason asked the boy. "Owen." "You good to sit up, Owen?" "Easy. Use the good arm." He helped the boy into a sitting position and then stood back up and looked at Travis again. "He's a kid," Mason said, "and you're bullying him." The word landed like something physical. Travis blinked twice. Then his face went to the particular shade of red that comes from humiliation being converted to rage. "Did you just bully?" "It's a plain word. You know what it means." "Get out of my studio or what?" Silence, hard and flat. Travis took a breath. Then he stepped closer, closing the distance between them to about 30 inches. "I'm going to teach you what happens when a janitor forgets his place." Something shifted in Mason's face. Not much, but it was there for anyone paying close enough attention. A settling, like a machine cycling to ready. "I'd think about that," Mason said quietly. "Before you make a decision you can't take back." That almost sounded like a threat. It was advice. Travis stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then he grabbed Mason's shirt with both hands. It was in that moment, that exact moment, that something in the room changed. Because of what Travis did. Because of what Mason did not do. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. His hands didn't come up. His shoulders didn't rise. His breathing, as far as anyone could tell, didn't change at all. He just looked at Travis. Calm and steady, and without any particular expression. For one unreadable second, Travis Kane, a man who had spent his adult life learning to project physical dominance, felt something unfamiliar. What it was. He should have listened to it. "Apologize," Travis said. Low, tight, in front of my class. Mason said nothing. "You heard me. Apologize." The fluorescent light buzzed above them. Owen Parker sat on the mat and watched. The parents along the wall watched. 12 students in white giyas watched, and Mason Hale, the man who cleaned their floors and emptied their trash cans, and nobody had ever thought twice about, looked Travis Kane in the eye and said nothing. Travis pulled him forward by the shirt. Was his mistake. What happened next was not dramatic, was the most unnerving thing about it. There was no explosion of motion, movie-style burst of choreography. Mason moved the way a wrench moves when you apply pressure to a bolt, minimal effort, directed precisely, no wasted force. He brought both arms up through the inside of Travis's grip and broke the hold outward, stepped offline to and used Travis's own forward momentum to redirect him. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Travis hit the mat on his side, arm locked out, cheek pressed against the floor. He wasn't hurt. He could get up the moment Mason released. But he wasn't releasing. "You need to calm down," Mason said from above him. His voice was the same as it had been since the moment he walked in. "I'm going to let you up. And when I do, we're going to stand up and behave like adults in front of these kids. Get off." You've got an audience. Don't make this worse than it is. He released the hold and stepped back. Gave Travis room. Gave him the choice. Travis got up, face crimson, chest heaving. And from behind Mason, there was a sound. Movement. The larger of Travis's two assistants, a guy named Derek, 20s, former collegiate wrestler, 260 on a lean frame, had already covered half the distance across the mat. He didn't announce himself. He came in fast and low, aiming for Mason's midsection. Mason heard it before he saw it. The shift of weight on rubber flooring. Particular slap of a large body moving with commitment. He stepped inside the angle of attack, let Derek's momentum carry him wide, and used a short armbar, an inside trip to put him down hard. Gentle, not rough. Sufficient. Derek hit the mat, rolled, and didn't get back up immediately. Stayed on his hands and knees, catching his breath. Silence, complete and total. A water bottle that had been sitting on the edge of the equipment rack chose that exact moment to roll off the shelf and tap across the mat floor. The sound of it was obscene in the quiet. Talk, talk, talk. Nobody moved. Mason stood in the center of the mat. Fighting stance. No posturing. Hands loose at his sides. Could have been standing in his kitchen waiting for coffee to brew. He turned away from Travis. He turned away from Derek. And he went back to Owen. "You okay?" he asked. The boy stared at him. "Shoulder's going to be sore. Put ice on it tonight. First 20 minutes. Wrap it if you've got an ace bandage. Okay. You got someone to take you home?" Owen glanced at the wall. Parents had already stood up and was walking toward them. Late 30s, tired eyes, wearing a coat she'd had on since getting off work. "My mom," Owen said. "Good." Mason stood up. He looked once at the room, the still frozen students, the parents who had finally found their feet, and he walked toward the door. From behind him, Travis Kane's voice. Different now. Stripped of theater. Just raw. "I'm calling the police." Mason stopped. He didn't turn around. "Okay," he said. "You assaulted me. In front of witnesses. I heard you. You think I'm bluffing?" A pause. "I think you're going to call whoever you want," Mason said. "I'll be in the corridor." He walked through the door. Behind him, in Studio B, someone let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since the moment he walked in. He leaned against the hallway wall and drank the rest of his thermos. Lukewarm, tasted like the inside of the lid. His heart rate was elevated, maybe 110. Bad. He breathed through his nose slowly. Let it come down. He could hear Travis on the phone through the door. Elevated voice. Words like attacked and unprovoked and dangerous. Performance wasn't over. Mason set the thermos down on his cart and thought about Lily. She'd be asleep by now. Mrs. Garland would have the TV on low volume at 12, the same news channel she always watched. Lily sometimes left her shoes in the middle of the floor, and Mason always found them in the morning and put them by the door. Small things. Reliable things. He thought about those things because they were what came natural, and because the other option was thinking about what was coming next, the patrol car, the questions, the explanation he would have to give that would unravel the thing he'd spent 2 years carefully keeping wound shut. After a minute, he heard the studio door open. He looked up. It wasn't Travis. It was a woman, one of the parents. Mid-40s, sensible, haircut. She had her car keys in one hand and was looking at him the way people look at something they can't quite categorize. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Who are you?" she said. Mason picked up his thermos. "Maintenance," he said. She kept looking at him. "That's not what I mean," she said. He didn't answer, and something in silence, the particular kind that doesn't come from not having an answer, but from having one he wasn't ready to give, made her stop pressing. She nodded once, went back through the door. 40 seconds later, through the exterior window at the end of the corridor, Mason saw the red and blue lights begin to paint the rain-wet parking lot. He picked up his mop and waited. The red and blue lights swept through the corridor window in slow, repeating arcs, painting the tile floor in colors that had no business being inside a building this quiet. Mason didn't move from the wall. He'd set the mop back in the bucket and was standing with his arms loose at his sides, thermos capped, cart parked against the baseboard. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. Nothing about his posture suggested he'd just put people on the floor in under 30 seconds. That was deliberate. He heard the front entrance open the particular whine of the hydraulic hinge that he'd been meaning to report to the building manager for 6 weeks. 2 sets of footsteps on the lobby tile. Solid paste, the kind that came from people wearing boots with some weight to them. He didn't turn to look. He already knew what was coming. He turned. 2 officers. Patrol Unit, Coldwater Ridge PD. The first one was maybe 30, broad through the chest, hand resting near his belt, in that unconscious way officers do when they're walking into an unknown situation. The second was older, late 40s, salt and pepper at the temples, a face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. His nameplate said Briggs. "You, Mason Hale?" Briggs asked. "You work here, maintenance?" "Have for 2 years." Briggs looked at the cart, the mop, the name tag. His face gave nothing away. "We got a call. Assault, reportedly in Studio B." "You involved in that?" "I was in Studio B." "Yes. You want to tell me what happened?" Mason looked at him steadily. "I'd like to tell you in order, if that's all right. Start to finish. Shouldn't take long." Briggs studied him for a moment. Then he nodded once and pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Go ahead." Mason talked. He didn't embellish and he didn't minimize. He told it the way he used to write AARs after action reviews, back when writing them was part of the job. Sequential, specific, no language that could be read 2 ways. He said he'd been working the corridor. He said he heard an impact that didn't sound right. He said he'd gone in and found a minor on the floor. He said he'd checked the kid, asked him to stay put, and was told by the instructor to leave. He said the instructor had grabbed him first. He said he'd used what was necessary to stop the grab and nothing more. He said the second man, the assistant, had come at him from behind, without warning. The younger officer was writing things down. Briggs was watching Mason's face. The instructor Kane, he's saying, "You walked in and started it." He can say that. "You're not worried about that?" "There are 20-some people who were in that room," Mason said. "I'm not worried." Briggs clicked his pen twice, thinking. "What's your background, Mr. Hale?" A small pause. The HVAC kicked on, somewhere above them. "Maintenance," Mason said. Briggs looked at him. The look said, "That's not what I mean, and we both know it." He didn't push it. "Not yet. I'm going to need to speak with the other parties," he said. "You mind waiting out here? Take your time." Briggs gestured to the younger officer, and they went through the studio door. It swung shut behind them with a soft mechanical click. Mason leaned back against the wall. Down the corridor, the lobby entrance, he could see the shapes of people filtering out, parents from Studio B, collecting their kids, collecting their coats, speaking in low voices. A few of them looked down the hall toward him as they passed. Some looked away quickly. Others didn't. One woman stopped. She was the same one from before, sensible haircut, car keys. She had a kid with her now, a girl about 12, who was looking at Mason with the wide-eyed focus of someone who has just watched something they don't quite have words for yet. The woman steered her daughter gently toward the exit. Before she turned, she looked back at Mason one more time. She nodded. It was a small thing. It didn't cost her anything. Cost her something. Mason nodded back. They kept him in the corridor for 40 minutes. He heard voices through the studio door, not the words, just the shape of them. Travis's voice had a particular quality when it was performing versus when it wasn't, and in there it was performing, rising and falling in a way that was meant to impress. At some point, Owen's mother came out. She had Owen beside her, arm in a makeshift sling improvised from someone's sweatshirt tied around his neck. She was a compact woman with the kind of composure you build from years of not having the option to fall apart. She stopped when she saw Mason. "You're the one who came in," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Owen, and then back at Mason. Something was working behind her eyes that he didn't try to read. "Shoulder," she said. "How bad?" "I don't think it's dislocated. Probably sprained, maybe a mild separation. He should get it looked at tonight, if you can manage it." Was staring at his shoes. "Owen," Mason said. The boy looked up. "Ice. 20 minutes. Then tomorrow, see a doctor." "Okay," Owen said. His voice was still thin, but he was holding Mason's gaze now. She hadn't been doing when Mason first walked into that room. The mother nodded. She started moving toward the exit, one hand on Owen's good shoulder. She stopped. "What's your name?" she asked. without turning around. Mason. She didn't say anything else, just kept walking. Briggs came back out at 9:40. Two witnesses corroborate your version, he said. Kept his voice neutral, professional. Kane's story has some problems with the sequencing. We're going to get written statements from the parents. All right, Kane wants to press charges, I figured. You're not concerned. It wasn't quite a question. He grabbed me first, Mason said, in front of a room full of people. And I stopped two grown men who came at me, without putting either of them in the hospital. I'm not concerned. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. In the corridor light, his face was the color of old concrete. He had the look of a man who had spent a long time watching other people lie and had gotten very good at noticing when they weren't. The way you handled yourself in there, Briggs said. Kane's assistant is 6'2", 250. You put him down in what, 3 seconds? Maybe. Where'd you learn that? A beat. Here and there, Mason said. Briggs wrote something on his notepad that seemed to take a few extra seconds. I'm going to need your contact information, he said. Someone's going to follow up in the next day or two. Do not leave the area. I'm not going anywhere. Briggs capped his pen. He was about to turn away when he stopped. You got family? Mason looked at him. Daughter, 9 years old. Briggs nodded slowly. Something in the set of his jaw shifted very slightly. He put the notepad back in his pocket. Stay available, he said. Yes, sir. Officers left. The hydraulic hinge whined and settled. The lobby was empty. The lights had been set to half power by the automatic timer, the way they always were after 9:30, and the whole building felt dim and hollow and too large. Mason stood in the corridor for another minute. Then he got his cart and finished his shift. It was what you did. He got home at 2:58 a.m. Mrs. Garland was asleep in the recliner with the TV on the news anchor, talking in a hushed voice about something happening in a city far enough away that no, real at this hour. No. Mason turned the set off, got the old woman's coat from the hook by the door, and laid it over her. She didn't wake. He checked Lily's room. She was on her side, one arm hanging off the mattress, slightly open, completely horizontal in the boneless way that only kids can sleep. Her shoes were in the middle of the floor. He picked them up and set them by the door. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark and drank a glass of water. His right hand was sore, not from the altercation from where Travis had grabbed his shirt, and he'd had to torque the grip off at an angle that put stress on the knuckle. Small thing, wouldn't last. But he sat there flexing the hand slowly and thinking about nothing in particular, which was the way he thought about things that mattered. 2 years. 2 years of quiet, of being the man in the gray uniform that nobody looked at twice. School pickups and grocery runs, and nights in the corridor with a mop, and nobody knowing a thing. That was what he'd built. That was what he'd chosen. Was 6 years old, and he'd looked at himself in a mirror in a hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, and made a decision about what the rest of his life was going to be for. He'd done well. He'd been careful. He hadn't given anything away. One night with a scared kid on a mat, and all that carefulness was somewhere in the rear view. He flexed his hand again. Then he stopped and left it open, flat on the table. It was fine. He'd deal with whatever came. He always did. He slept 4 hours, which was more than he usually got, and was up by 7 to make Lily's lunch. Peanut butter and sliced apple on whole wheat, the crust removed because she was 9 years old and 9-year-olds had opinions about crusts. A handful of pretzels, a juice box, a note that said, "Have a good day," because he'd done that since her first day of kindergarten, and she'd told him once that she'd be upset if he stopped. He walked her to school on Tuesdays. Today was Friday, which meant the bus. She had her backpack on and her hair in 2 uneven pigtails, uneven, because Mason was proficient in many things, and hair ties were not among them. "Dad," she said at the door. "Yeah, you look tired." "I'm fine, you always say that." Because it's usually true. She studied him with the particular gravity of a 9-year-old who has decided she is old enough to be suspicious. "Did something happen at work?" she asked. "Had a late night." "What does that mean?" "It means I cleaned more floors than usual." She considered that. "Okay," she said. "And then, can we have pizza Friday?" Today is Friday. Her face lit up in a way that made the sore knuckle and the 4 hours of sleep and the police report, waiting somewhere on Briggs's desk, feel like they belong to a different person. "That's a yes?" she said. "That's a yes." She went down the porch steps in 2 jumps and headed toward the bus stop, backpack bouncing, pigtails lopsided. Mason watched until she reached the corner. Then he went inside, poured the rest of the coffee down the drain, and picked up his phone. There were 2 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, both from this morning 40 minutes apart. No voicemail. He put the phone face down on the counter. No. He thought about calling Briggs to get ahead of whatever was coming, then decided against it. He'd answered the questions asked of him. He'd been straight. Anything more than that would start to look like something it wasn't. The less he said, the simpler things stayed. Or so he still believed on that particular Friday morning. Call came at 11:17. Briggs, a different officer, a woman, Detective Reyes, who introduced herself quickly and professionally and said she had some follow-up questions for him regarding the incident at Black Ridge Community Center. He said he was available. She said she'd prefer to do it in person. He said fine and gave her his address. She said she'd be there at 1. She arrived at 12:50, which Mason noted, because people who arrive early to interviews are either very organized or very interested, and he wasn't sure which one he was hoping for. No. She was younger than he expected, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back flat, wearing a gray jacket that looked like it had been a good jacket 4 years ago. She had the kind of directness that comes from having been underestimated long enough to stop tolerating it. She showed her badge at the door and looked past him briefly at the interior of the house before looking back. Place, she said, not warmly, just filing it away. It's not much, Mason said. Come in. She came in, declined coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a folder she set down and didn't immediately open. Mr. Hale, I want to be straightforward with you. I'd appreciate that. Kane's complaint is on paper. We're required to follow through on it. But we also have 7 witness statements from last night that tell a very different story than his. She paused. I'm not here to find out if you did something wrong. I'm here to understand who I'm talking to. Mason watched her. What do you mean? He said. She opened the folder, set a single sheet on the table and pushed it toward him. He looked down. It was a printout. Sparse. Not a lot on it, that was actually the tell. When a background check came back sparse, it usually meant one of 2 things. The person had lived a very boring life. The parts of their life that were interesting weren't in any database you could access from a county precinct. She watched him look at it. You have a Montana driver's license registered at this address, she said. County work permit. A joint checking account in your name and your daughter's. 10-year-old F-150 registered in Montana. She tapped the page. Before 2016, you don't exist. No credit history. No employment records. Tax filings. Nothing. The refrigerator hummed. A lot of people pay cash, Mason said. A lot of people do. She held his gaze. A lot of people move the way you moved last night. Silence. I've talked to 4 of the parents who were in that room, Reyes continued. 2 of them described what you did to Derek Sims, Kane's assistant, as looking like something from a military training video. Their words, not mine. She leaned back slightly. Derek Sims played D1 wrestling at Wyoming. He outweighed you by 60-plus pounds, and you put him down in under 3 seconds from a disadvantaged position without injuring him. She wasn't saying it to impress him. She was saying it to show him that she'd done her homework and she wasn't going to pretend she hadn't. Mason looked at the printout. Then he picked it up and set it down again. What is it you want to know? He asked. I want to know what I'm dealing with, she said. Because right now, I've got a complaint against you that I don't believe, a background file that tells me almost nothing, a set of eyewitness descriptions that don't match the guy in the maintenance uniform. She folded her hands on the table. I'm asking you directly. Who are you, Mr. Hale? Kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car went past on the street. It barked twice and stopped. Mason sat with the question for a moment. Really sat with it. Then he said, I'm Lily's father. Reyes looked at him. That's a real answer, he said. It's just not the one you're looking for. She didn't speak immediately. The folder sat between them on the table. Are you currently active? She asked. Quietly. Not like a cop asking a civilian. Like someone who knew what the question meant. Mason met her eyes. No, he said, were you? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. I left that life a long time ago, he said. She nodded once. Slowly. The way you nod when someone has confirmed something you already suspected but needed to hear out loud. Close the folder. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. Kane is pushing this hard. He's got a lawyer already, someone from Billings, not local. That tells me either he's got money or somebody's helping him with money. No, he's going to make this loud. She looked at him directly. There are things in your background that you'd prefer to keep there. A loud civil case is a bad environment for that. Mason didn't react. I'm not threatening you, she added. I'm telling you what's coming so you can be ready for it. I appreciate that. She stood, picked up the folder. One more thing, she said. Yeah, the boy Owen Parker. His mother filed a separate complaint this morning. Against Kane. Excessive force, verbal harassment, pattern of behavior. She tucked the folder under her arm. She's not the first. There are 2 prior complaints in the community center's internal records. Both flagged, neither escalated. She said it evenly, but something behind her eyes was less even. That's going to matter. More than your thing with Kane, probably. She moved toward the door. Detective, Mason said. She stopped. How'd you know to come early? She looked at him. Anything, she said. I just didn't want to waste your time. She left, the door closed softly behind her. Mason sat at the table for a while. The folder was gone, but the table still felt like something had been laid on it and not fully removed. He thought about Lily's pigtails. Uneven, both of them. He thought about Owen Parker on that mat. He thought about a sparse background check and a woman from Billings who was already building something. And he thought about a word that Reyes had used, carefully, almost offhandedly. Pattern. If there were prior complaints that had been buried, then what happened last night wasn't a single bad evening in a small Montana town. It was the latest entry in something longer, something that had been allowed to continue because nobody had pushed on it hard enough. Until a man with a mop pushed on it. Mason stood up, rinsed his glass, and set it in the rack. He needed to talk to a lawyer. Because he'd done anything wrong, he knew what he'd done and why. But because being right without representation in a situation with a Billings attorney on the other side was the kind of mistake that a man only made once. He picked up his phone. 3 missed calls. 2 from the same unknown number as before, and 1 from a number he recognized immediately and had not thought about in a long time. Stood very still. The number on the screen belonged to a man named Ray Colton, a man Mason had not spoken to in 4 years. A man who, as far as the public record was concerned, worked in logistics for a federal contractor in Virginia. Put the phone down. Picked it up again. Stared at the number. Put it down. The refrigerator hummed. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a low angle, catching dust in the air. His right hand was still sore. He left the phone on the counter and went to get his jacket. He had an errand to run before Lily got off the bus. Pizza dough, if the grocery store hadn't sold out of the fresh kind. She liked when he made the sauce from scratch. He'd deal with Ray Colton when he had to. He wasn't there yet, but standing in his kitchen with his jacket half on, and the afternoon going sideways, and a phone that didn't ring for 4 years, suddenly ringing twice in one morning, Mason Hale understood the particular clarity of a man who had once read situations for a living, that he was getting there fast. He bought the pizza dough. Fresh, from the refrigerated case, near the back of the grocery store, the kind in the plastic sleeve that Lily liked because she could help stretch it without it tearing. He got 2 cans of crushed tomatoes, a block of mozzarella, a bag of shredded Parmesan, because he always bought both and mixed them, which Lily had once described as the secret with the complete authority of someone who had not yet learned that most secrets aren't secrets at all. He drove home on Route 9, the long way, which added 6 minutes and took him past the elementary school closed and empty on a Friday afternoon, and then through the stretch of 2-lane that ran alongside the river. The water was low this time of year, gray-green between the cottonwoods, moving slow. He drove with the window cracked because the truck's heat ran hot on the passenger side, and he'd never gotten around to fixing the blend door. The phone sat in the cup holder. Ray Colton's number still on the screen. He drove past the school, past the river, past the feed store that had been going out of business for what seemed like 3 years without ever actually closing. He didn't call. Not yet. Lily came off the bus at 3:22 with the drawing she'd done in art class, rolled up and rubber banded and held against her chest like something fragile. She showed him before she even got her backpack. Off a house with a lopsided chimney. 2 figures out front. Sits one tall and one short. The short one with a yellow circle for a head, because, she explained very seriously, she hadn't had time to draw the hair. That's you, she said, pointing to the tall one. And that's me. Which one's which? He asked. She looked at him. Dad, I'm kidding. The tall one is you.
Obviously.
He taped it to the refrigerator. She went to change out of her school clothes, and he started the sauce crushed tomatoes into the pan. Garlic from the jar, because fresh took longer than he had. A pinch of sugar to cut the acid. Dried oregano. Dried basil. Kitchen filled with a smell that felt like the most normal thing in the world. Which was precisely the point. While the sauce simmered, he checked his phone. 4 calls now. Colton, 4 calls. No voicemail on any of them. Ray not leaving a message meant Ray didn't want a record of the contact, which meant this wasn't a social call, which it was never going to be anyway, because Mason and Ray Colton had not had a social relationship in going on 5 years. What they had was a shared history that neither of them talked about, and that had no business intersecting with a kitchen that smelled like garlic and a drawing of a lopsided house taped to a refrigerator. He put the phone face down. Lily came back in wearing socks with cartoon frogs on them and asked if she could stretch the dough. Wash your hands first. I always wash my hands. That's why I said first, not always. She rolled her eyes in the way that 9-year-olds do when they are performing exasperation for an audience of one and secretly find it funny. She washed her hands. She stretched the dough. She tore a small hole near the edge and looked at him sideways. That happens, he said. You always say that. It always does. Made the pizza. They ate it at the kitchen table with the TV off because Mason had a rule about dinner, not a hard rule. A rule he'd ever written down or announced formally. Just a thing they did. A habit he'd built when she was small enough that the alternative was her eating with her eyes on a screen for 20 minutes and not saying a word. She was old enough to fill the silence herself. She talked about a girl in her class named Priya who had gotten a hamster and brought photos in to show everyone. She talked about a math test she thought she'd done okay on but wasn't sure. She talked about whether hamsters were better than dogs, which she'd been cycling back to in various forms for 2 months, and which Mason understood was less about hamsters and more about dogs. He listened to all of it. He asked questions. He ate 3 slices and she ate 2.5, and when they cleared the table, she wiped it down without being asked, because she'd started doing that about 6 months ago, and he hadn't said anything about it because some things you leave alone and let exist. After she was in bed shower, book, lights out at 8:30, Mason sat on the porch with his jacket on and a cup of coffee that was cooling too fast in the October air, and he called Ray Colton. Rang once. I was starting to think you'd gone dark on me, Ray said. His voice was the same. Flat, efficient, mid-Atlantic accent that came from growing up in Delaware and spending 15 years in places that smoothed regional edges into something less identifiable. He sounded like a man reading a memo. I was busy, Mason said. I heard a beat. Word travels, Mason said. Word doesn't travel. I made a call. A pause. Coldwater Ridge PD ran your name last night. It's a flag. Flag comes to me. There's still a flag on my name. There's still a flag on your name, Mason. He hadn't known that. He sat with it for a moment. What do you want, Ray? I want to know how bad this is. It's not bad. The guy grabbed me. I put him down. There are witnesses. The guy's got a lawyer from Billings. You know why? Mason looked at the street. Car went past slowly, the way cars do in neighborhoods where people actually live, not passing through. Porch light was throwing a yellow circle on the steps, and seas hadn't gone away yet, not quite cold enough. Tell me why, Mason said. Kane's got a connection. His uncle is Douglas Merritt. The name sat in the air for a moment. Mason knew the name. Most people in that part of Montana knew it in the general way you know the names of men who own enough land and sit on enough boards that their presence is ambient. You feel it without looking directly at it. Had money, the quiet, generational kind. He'd been on the county planning board for 11 years. He had what Ray would call reach. Kane's uncle is Merritt, Mason said. Has been his whole life. Merritt put up the money for the studio. Merritt has been making calls to the department since last night. To do what? To encourage a particular interpretation of events. Mason set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. How do you know this? He asked. Because I make it my business to know things. Same as I always did. A short pause. Same as you always did, before you went and got domestic on me. I'm not criticizing. I'm reminding you that you're not in a clean situation, regardless of what you did or didn't do in that gym. The moths circled the porch light. The coffee was cold. What do you want me to do about it? Mason said. Nothing dramatic. I want you to be aware. I want you to not do anything that gives Merritt more to work with than he already has. And I want you to understand that if this goes somewhere that requires a different kind of resolutions, it's not going there. Mace, it's a civil complaint, Ray. Maybe a misdemeanor charge that gets dropped in 30 days. The witnesses are solid. I didn't put anyone in a hospital. This resolves. Silence on the line. And the investigation into Kane? Ray said. That's separate. That's the detective's job, not mine. We'll shut it down. Maybe. Maybe not. Mason picked the coffee back up, changed his mind, set it down again. There are prior complaints, a paper trail. Once that's in a detective's hands, Merritt's reach only goes so far. Ray was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed register slightly. Less professional. More like someone who had known Mason long enough to dispense with certain pretenses. You've got the kid, Ray said. I've got Lily. Yes. I'm not talking about Lily. Another pause. I'm talking about the Parker kid. The one from the gym. If Merritt goes after Kane's situation hard enough, and the witnesses start feeling pressure, the whole thing pivots. Complaint gets buried. And the kid who was already getting hurt keeps getting hurt. Mason was quiet. I know you know that, Ray said. I know you don't want to be in this. I'm already in it. I know that too. A breath barely audible. I'm just saying. If you need anything, if it goes somewhere you can't handle from a porch in Montana with cold coffee, you've got a number. Mason looked at the phone. How'd you know the coffee was cold? Because you've been sitting out there for 20 minutes, and it's 42 degrees. He almost said something, didn't. Get some sleep, Ray said. Mason. Merritt. He didn't get where he is by letting things run their natural course. The line went dead. Mason sat on the porch for another 10 minutes. Then he went inside, poured the coffee down the sink, and checked on Lily. Still asleep, same position as always on her side, one arm off the mattress. He adjusted the blanket. He went to bed at 11. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling. He slept at 11:40. It was not restful. Monday came with low clouds, and the specific kind of cold that suggested winter was no longer a forecast but a decision. Mason drove Lily to school Colchester Rospenditsen because Mrs. Garland had a doctor's appointment, and the bus timing was off. And on the way back, he stopped at the office of a lawyer named Patricia Okafor, who worked out of a storefront on Clement Street between a tax preparation service and a place that sold fishing equipment. Yes, he'd intervened. He'd found her name through the community center's insurance liaison, who owed him a favor for not reporting a water heater issue that could have become a building code problem. It wasn't a clean way to get a referral. It was the way available to him. Okafor was 50, Nigerian-American, originally from Houston, with a law degree from Tulane and 17 years of practice in the kind of mid-sized Montana town where a good generalist attorney saw everything eventually. She had a handshake like a closing argument, and she looked at Mason's situation the way a mechanic looks at an engine, not with alarm, just with professional assessment. You're the maintenance guy from Blackridge, she said, when he sat down. You heard, small town. 3 people told me before you walked in. She looked at a legal pad in front of her. Kane's attorney is Dale Forsyth. He's out of a firm in Billings that does mostly civil litigation and insurance defense. He's not criminal, which tells me this is being pursued as a tort, not a criminal matter. Money, or they want to embarrass you. Probably both. They're not going to find much money. They don't need to find it. They need to make pursuing it expensive enough that you settle. She tapped her pen. Standard playbook. Depose the witnesses. Drag it out. Make it cost time and energy and see if you blink. People say that. I know what I did and why, Mason said. I can sit in a deposition for as long as they want. She studied him. Briggs pulled your record, she said. Essentially isn't one. That's going to be a problem in a deposition. Forsyth will push on your background. Gaps in employment history, gaps in identity, prior addresses that don't exist. Can't explain them. He'll use them to paint a picture. What kind of picture? Kind where a shadowy drifter with no verifiable past shows up in a small town, takes a low-profile job, and then commits unprovoked violence in a room full of children. She said it flatly, without drama, the way you describe a weather pattern. It's not accurate, but it's a narrative. Narratives win cases when facts are inconvenient. Mason looked at his hands on the table. What do you need from me? He said. I need to know what's in those gaps. A long pause. Some of it's not mine to give, he said. Is it classified? He looked at her. Some of it. She wrote something down. Federal service? I'd rather not get into the specific nature on the record. She set her pen down. She set her pen down, looked at him directly, the way she probably looked at juries when she wanted them to understand something important. Mr. Hale, I can work with what you give me, but I need to know which direction to lean. If your background is federal service, military, intelligence, any alphabet agency, there are legal mechanisms that limit what Forsyth can compel in discovery. That's actually protective. On the other hand, if there are things in your past that are not federal service and not classified things that would embarrass you, in another context, I need to know about those too. I'm not standing in a room when something lands on the floor and surprises me. There's nothing like that. People say that too. Okafor. He met her eyes. There's nothing like that. She held his gaze. Then she picked up the pen again. Federal service, she said. Not a question this time. Past. Well past. When you left voluntary. Honorably? Yes. She wrote for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Then here's what we do. He left her office at 10:45 with a signed retainer, a list of 3 things he needed to produce, the incident timeline he'd given Briggs, the names of any witnesses he'd personally spoken to. Yes, he'd intervened, and a written account of his movements that night, in his own words, and the particular feeling of having handed something over to someone else's jurisdiction, which was not a feeling Mason had ever been comfortable with. He sat in the truck in the parking lot for a moment. Then he called the number Reyes had given him. She picked up on the second ring. She said, No preamble, detective. I wanted to follow up. You said there were prior complaints in the community center's records. Are they in your hands now? A pause. They are, she said carefully. Is the investigation into Kane still open? Their pause. Longer. I'm not going to discuss the status of a separate investigation with a party to a complaint, she said, which wasn't an answer, which was in itself an answer. Someone's pushing on it, Mason said. I'm not going to confirm or deny. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm telling you that someone is pushing on it, and you probably already know who, and I think you're smart enough to know why. And I think you know that if it gets buried, Owen Parker is going to end up back in that room with Travis Kane inside of a month. Silence. That's not how this works, Ray said. But her voice had less authority in it than her words. How it works, Mason said. I'm asking you to let it work the right way. A breath, Mr. Hale. My investigation is my business. You focus on your situation. My situation is fine. You've got Dale Forsyth coming at you. I've got Patricia Okafor. Pause, different quality than the others. You moved fast, she said. Habit. She was quiet for a moment. The prior complaints, she said, very carefully, as if reading from something, relate to excessive force during training. One from 18 months ago, one from 7. The 18-month complaint came with a photograph. It was logged. It was reviewed internally by the Community Center Administration. Action taken. She stopped. That's public record. I'm not giving you anything. I know. So you didn't hear it from me. I'm not going to hear anything from you, Mason said. The line was quiet. Get a lawyer, she said. Already did. She ended the call. Mason sat in the parking lot. A woman walked past with a stroller. A delivery truck backed into the space ahead of him with its alarm beeping. Clouds had come lower in the last hour, the kind that sat on the mountains and didn't move all day. He thought about a photograph. 18 months old. Someone had seen enough to take a picture and file a complaint. and still nothing had happened, which meant the people inside the community center who'd had the power to act had chosen not to, for whatever reason. And now that reason had a name that sounded like merit. He started the truck. He had 2 hours before he needed to be back for Lily's afternoon pickup. He used one of them to go home and write out the incident timeline for Okafor, longhand first, and then typed at the kitchen table. He was specific. He was sequential. He did not editorialize. He sat with the last paragraph for a while before typing it. After neutralizing the second individual, I disengaged immediately and returned to check on the minor. I made no further physical contact with either party. I remained on site and cooperated fully with responding officers. He read it back. It was accurate, every word of it. He sent it to Okafor's email and closed the laptop. Phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, no area code he recognized. You should have stayed in the hallway. Maintenance man. He read it twice, put the phone down, picked it up and screenshot it. Sent the screenshot to Okafor with a one-line note. Received this at 12:08 p.m. Saving the original. Then he blocked the number. He thought about calling Reyes. Decided to let Okafor handle it. That was what the retainer was for. He made himself a sandwich he didn't particularly want, ate half of it, and drove to get Lily. Tuesday came and went without incident, which made Mason more alert, not less. In his experience, the days that looked like nothing were often the days that were carrying something. Since Wednesday, he got a call from the community center director, a man named Halverson, 60-something, white-haired, the kind of administrator who gave off the permanent impression of wanting to be somewhere that wasn't a difficult conversation. He asked Mason to come in before his shift started. Said it was routine. Said it in the voice of a man for whom it was not routine. Mason arrived at 5:30. Halverson's office smelled like old paper and the specific brand of air freshener they used in every government-adjacent building in every small town in America. He had a mug on his desk that said "World's Okayest Director," which someone had probably given him as a joke, and he'd kept because it was accurate. "Mason," he said, "sit down." Mason sat. Halverson had his hands folded on the desk. There was a file folder there too, closed, which he didn't open. This situation with Kane, he started. Yes, the center's position, and I want to be clear. This comes from the board, not from me personally. What's the position? Halverson unfolded and refolded his hands. The board is concerned about liability, he said. An incident occurred on our premises. There's an ongoing legal complaint. There are questions about your conduct. There are witnesses who describe my conduct, Mason said. All of them. I know that. I've read the statements. Halverson looked at the closed folder. But the board is also receiving communication from outside parties, encouraging a particular response. Douglas Merritt. Halverson's expression didn't change, which was its own expression. I'm not able to comment on that, he said. Okay. What I can tell you is that the board has asked me to place you on administrative leave, pending the resolution of the complaint. With pay. It's not a termination. It's precautionary. Mason looked at him. You're pulling me off my shift, he said. Temporarily. Because someone with money is making calls. Because the board has liability concerns, Halverson said. Firmly this time, with the specific firmness of a man repeating a line he'd been given. I want to be clear. Mason, this is not a judgment about what happened. Procedural response to an open legal matter. It's Monday night and my shift is Thursday. 3 days. The leave starts now. He said it with a look that was either apologetic or performing apologetic well enough that the difference didn't matter. Mason sat with it for a moment. Then he stood up. All right, he said. Mason, it's fine, Phil. He said the man's first name for the first time in 2 years of working together. Warmly. Just to make clear he knew it. I understand the position. Halverson looked relieved in the way that people look relieved when the difficult conversation has ended without anything catching fire. Mason walked out. In the parking lot, he sat in the truck for a moment. Administrative leave. Pay intact for now. But the message was clear. Was tightening. Not dramatically, no dramatic moves. Yet, nothing that looked overtly like pressure. Just the incremental kind applied across multiple points simultaneously in the way that someone who understood how systems worked would apply it. Remove the complaining party from his position. Slow the investigation. Keep Forsyth pushing on the civil complaint to drain resources. Let the whole thing become expensive and exhausting enough that the path of least resistance pointed toward walking away. It was a clean play. Mason had seen cleaner. He started the truck. He was 3 blocks from the community center when his phone rang. Ray, not Okafor, not Reyes, Owen Parker's mother. He answered, "Miss Parker, Mr. Hale." Her voice was controlled but carrying something underneath it. "I need to tell you something. I'm listening." Owen came home from school today. A breath. 2 boys. In the parking lot after 6th period. They told him to drop the complaint. Said if he didn't, things would get worse for him than they already were. Mason said nothing. They knew his name, she said. They knew which complaint. This isn't random. Someone told them to go there. Did Owen see who they were? He knows one of them from his grade. Brendan Merritt. The name landed flat and certain in the cab of the truck. Mason said, "His grandfather is—" "I know who his grandfather is." Silence on the line, Mr. Hale. Her voice changed. Control slipped just enough. "My son is 14 years old. He already walks smaller than he should. And now this. Someone is sending children to intimidate other children, and I don't—" She stopped. "I don't know who to call. I called Cheese, and she said she'd look into it. But I felt like you should know, because you're the only person who has actually done anything." Mason was at the intersection of Route 9 and Clement Street. "Was red," he said. "Linda. Linda. Is Owen home right now?" "Yes." Okay, a pause. "He's scared," she said. "He's trying not to show it, but he's scared. Is there somewhere you two can stay for a few days? Family, a friend, anywhere other than your house? My sister is in Billings. Can you go tonight?" "Tonight? I don't think anyone is going to show up at your door," Mason said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. But if Owen is rattled, being somewhere else for a few days while this gets sorted might be easier on him." "On you, silence." "You think it's that serious?" she said. "I think someone is escalating in small ways," he said. "And I'd rather you be somewhere comfortable while I figure out what that looks like." She was quiet for a long moment. "All right," she said. "We'll go tonight." "Good. Call Reyes and tell her where you're going." "Okay." A breath. Mr. Hale Mason. Mason. The word carried something in it. Weight or gratitude or something between the two that didn't have a clean name. "Thank you." The light turned green, he drove. He called Okafor and told her about the boys in the parking lot. She said she'd file a supplemental with the court and copy Reyes. She said it added a harassment dimension that changed the character of Forsyth's position. She said it in a way that suggested she was not entirely displeased. Called Reyes and got voicemail. Left a concise message. Number. The relevant facts. Thing extra. Then he drove the rest of the way home in the low gray afternoon with the window cracked and the river somewhere to his left beyond the cottonwoods. And he thought about Douglas Merritt using his grandson to threaten a 14-year-old kid in a school parking lot. There was a version of Mason Hale, the one from before Coldwater Ridge, before Lily's lunches and misses, Garland's casseroles, and the HVAC schedule at the community center, who would have had a very different response to that information. That version of him knew 12 different ways to make a man like Merritt understand that a line had been crossed. But that version was 11 years removed, and living in a past that Mason had chosen, deliberately and not without cost, to leave where it was. Pulled into the driveway. Lily's bedroom light was on. He could see it through the window from the truck. He sat in the driveway for a moment, with the engine off. Then he heard it. Not from the house. From the street behind him. The slow crunch of a vehicle pulling to the curb and stopping. Engine idling. No lights. He didn't move. Didn't turn around. His eyes went to the driver's side mirror, dark SUV. Late model. Montana plates, but parked at the angle of someone who hadn't been planning to stop here. 2 shapes in the front seat. Mason sat very still. The SUV sat there for 30 seconds. 40. The engine kept running. It pulled away. Slowly, no rush. Mason watched it until the taillights disappeared around the corner. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. Steady. He got out of the truck, walked up the porch steps, and went inside. Yes, Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, pencil in hand, frowning at a long division problem with the total concentration of someone who has not yet learned that frowning doesn't help. "Dad," she said. without looking up. Hey, Bug, I don't understand long division. I'll show you after dinner. You always say that, and then you make it more confusing. I make it more accurate. That's different. She looked up then, looked at him. The 9-year-old assessment, same as always, quick and direct and not entirely wrong. Okay, she said. Yeah, you have your work face. I don't have a work face. You have like 4 faces, she said matter-of-factly. Regular face, tired face, thinking about something face, and work face. She pointed her pencil at him. That's work face. He looked at her. I'm going to start dinner, he said. That's not a denial, Lily. I'm just saying. He went to the kitchen and started pulling things from the cabinet. Pasta, canned tomatoes, the particular routine of hands that knew what they were doing without being told. Through the window above the sink, the street was empty. SUV, no idling engine, just the yellow cone of the streetlight and the dark past it, and the kind of quiet that was either fine or wasn't. He filled the pot, set it on the burner, turned the flame on, and stood at the sink for a moment longer than necessary, looking at the street before he turned away. Pasta water took 11 minutes to boil. Mason stood at the stove and watched it, because watching something simple do what it was supposed to do was, in that moment, the most useful thing available to him. The street outside was still empty. The SUV hadn't come back. Lily was at the table behind him, working through her long division problem with the pencil eraser end, which meant she was erasing more than she was writing, which was fine. That was how you learned it. He salted the water when it boiled, added the pasta, set the timer. His phone was on the counter. He'd been waiting for it to do something, ring, buzz, a text from Okafor or Reyes, but it sat there doing nothing, which was its own kind of information. News, tonight, meant things were still in motion, but hadn't landed yet. The way weather sits on the ridgeline for hours before it decides to come down. He stirred the pasta. The SUV bothered him more than he wanted it to, because it was threatening. Exactly 2 men in a vehicle parked on a residential street wasn't a tactical posture. It was a message. We know where you live. We know which light is your daughter's. It was the kind of move that someone made when they wanted to generate anxiety without generating evidence. Was careful. That was the thing. This whole operation, if you could call it that, and Mason found it difficult not to, was careful. Incremental. Deniable at every step. Forsyth filing civil complaints. The board putting Mason on leave. A teenager in a school parking lot. Car parked on a dark street. None of it was illegal. None of it would stick to anything in a courtroom. All of it was designed to accumulate into a weight that a regular person couldn't carry. Timer went off. He drained the pasta. Dinner, he said. Lily came to the table. They ate. She talked about the long division problem, and he explained it in the way he always explained things, by working backward from the answer, which she said made more sense than working forward. But also she wished he'd told her that before she'd erased the same problem 4 times. He said that was a reasonable complaint. She said, thank you. Sat intervened. They finished dinner and she cleared the table and he washed the dishes. And neither of them talked about the work face she'd mentioned earlier, which meant she'd filed it somewhere and would probably return to it later. Direct and sidelong way that 9-year-olds return to things. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote out everything he knew about Douglas Merritt. Not much. What you could get from being a resident of Coldwater Ridge County for 2 years without trying. Land holdings north of town, a cattle operation that was probably half tax structure by now. Seat on the county planning board. Money that had been in the family long enough to feel like geography. He'd seen the name on the building permit signs for 2 different developments going up on the east side of town. He'd heard it mentioned at the hardware store in the context of who owned the water rights on a particular stretch of the river. What he didn't know was how deep it went. Whether Merritt's reach into the police department was transactional favors, campaign contributions, the standard small-town architecture of obligation, or something with more structure to it. He needed to know that before he knew what the SUV meant. He wrote Ray Colton's name at the bottom of the page, underlined it once, stared at it. Then he folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to bed. Called Ray at 6:15 the next morning, standing on the porch with coffee that was actually hot this time, before Lily was up. He said when Ray answered, "Good morning to you, too." Tell me what you know about him. A pause. The sound of movement on Ray's end, a chair, maybe, or someone repositioning in a quiet room. Douglas Merritt, 71 years old. Family money, third-generation cattle and timber. Current net worth, approximately $42 million by the last assessment I've seen, though that number's a few years old. Board member, Coldwater Ridge County Planning Commission, 11 years. Former board member, Montana Stock Growers Association. Donor to 4 consecutive county sheriff campaigns, 3 of which won. The sheriff, the current one, yes. Guy named Aldous Crane. Been in the seat 8 years. Mason drank his coffee. Is Crane in Merritt's pocket or just his orbit? He said. Functionally, the same thing at the county level. Doesn't have to be explicit. You donate to a man's campaign 4 times over 8 years. You attend his fundraisers. Your nephew runs a business in his jurisdiction. He knows what side his bread is on. Ray paused. That said, Crane's not dirty in the way that ends careers. He's just accommodating. The SUV last night. What about it? 2 men idling in front of my house, no lights. Late model Montana plates. 10 minutes after I got home. Silence. That's not Crane's people, Ray said. That's too sloppy for anything official. That's private. Has private security? His cattle operation does. Former law enforcement, mostly. A couple of guys with contractor backgrounds. A beat. Serious. Message senders. They sent a message. Did you receive it? I received it, Mason said. I'm choosing not to respond to it the way they intended. Ray's voice was even. Mason, I need to ask you something. Ahead. How exposed do you want to get on this? He watched the street. A neighbor's dog was being walked by a woman in a red coat, the dog stopping at every third driveway to investigate something invisible. Do you mean, he said. I mean, there's a version of this where you let Okafor handle the legal piece, let Reyes handle Kane, and you absorb the pressure until it resolves. Stay quiet, you stay small. You get your job back in 30 days, and Lily never knows any of it. Ray paused. And there's another version, where I stop staying small, where the situation requires something from you that isn't maintenance work. The woman in the red coat disappeared around the corner. You think it gets there, Mason said. I think Merritt is not going to let this be a simple civil complaint and a fired instructor. I think he's going to keep tightening until something gives. And I think the thing most likely to give is a 14-year-old kid and his mother, because they don't have resources, and they don't have background, and they're the weakest point in the structure.
A pause.
You stepping between Kane and that kid was the right call, but it made you the load-bearing wall. You don't get to be invisible anymore. Mason said nothing. I'm not telling you to do anything, Ray said. I'm telling you what I see. I know. You've got something most people in your position don't. What's that? You know exactly how bad it can get, which means you won't be surprised when it does. He finished the coffee. Cold again, somehow. He didn't remember it getting cold. I'll call you if I need something, he said. You know where I am. He ended the call and went inside to make Lily's breakfast. Reyes called at 9:40. We need to talk in person, she said. Can you come in the station? My office. 11. He was there at 10:55. Her office was a small rectangle off the main detective bullpen, glass-walled on 2 sides. Glass-walled 2 sides, with a desk that looked like it was losing a battle against paper. She had a whiteboard on the interior wall with names and dates in dry erase marker that she'd partially obscured with a sheet of copy paper when he came in, which he found interesting, and which he didn't comment on. She closed the door and sat across from him and put a manila folder on the desk between them. Kane's contract with the community center has been terminated as of this morning, she said. That's official. Halverson signed it. Okay. Kane is also now the subject of a formal investigation by this department. 3 complaints, including Linda Parker's, consolidated. She held his gaze. That's the good news. What's the bad news? She opened the folder, pushed a single sheet across the desk. It was a printout of a news article, dated yesterday afternoon, from the Coldwater Ridge Courier, the county's weekly paper, which also ran a daily online edition that approximately 4,000 people read, most of them over 60. The headline said, Community Center Incident Raises Questions About Employee Screening. Mason read the first 3 paragraphs. The article described the incident at Blackridge Community Center in general terms. referred to Travis Kane as a longtime local instructor, and to Mason as a maintenance employee with an unclear background. It quoted an unnamed source, a community member familiar with the situation, expressing concerns that the center had hired someone whose history could not be verified. It did not name Mason directly. It didn't need to. This ran yesterday, Mason said. Online, yes. Print edition tomorrow. Who placed it? That's not information I have. He looked at her. That's not information you have, he said. She held his gaze. Officially. But the Courier's publisher has a relationship with the county planning board that involves an advertising contract worth about $12,000 a year. She let that sit. That's public record. Mason set the article down. He said, I can't say that. You just did. And she leaned back in her chair. For a moment, she looked like someone who had been carrying something at shoulder height for a long time and was deciding whether to set it down. Mr. Hale, she said, I'm going to tell you something. And I want you to understand that I'm telling you as a professional courtesy and not as part of any official communication. Understood. Sheriff Crane got a call 2 days ago from someone he describes as a community stakeholder. He was asked, not directed, asked to review the status of the Kane investigation to ensure it was being handled with appropriate care given the community relationships involved. She picked up a pen, set it down. He passed that request to my lieutenant. My lieutenant told me. And I told my lieutenant that the investigation was being handled with exactly the appropriate amount of care and that I would continue to handle it that way. Something in Mason's chest did a small thing he couldn't name. How'd that land? He said. About as well as you'd expect. She looked at the whiteboard with its partially obscured names. I've been in this department 11 years. I've handled homicides, armed robbery, an attempted arson case that went federal. I know how to do my job, and I know when someone is trying to do it for me. Her jaw was set. Kane investigation is clean. It stays clean. I don't care whose nephew he is. About the boys in the parking lot, Mason said. Owen Parker. I know, Linda Parker is in Billings. Gave me a description of both individuals yesterday, via phone. One of them is who you think it is. She paused. That adds an intimidation angle that makes the Kane investigation more complicated to suppress, not less. Because now it's not just an instructor and a civil complaint. It's a pattern involving a minor. Merritt won't see it that way. What he sees isn't my problem. What I can prove is. Mason looked at her. What do you need from me? He said. Your cooperation, which you've already given. Your lawyer's contact information, which I already have. And she paused, and something shifted in her expression. Slight but readable. The look of someone about to step off a curb they've been standing on for a while. Your honest answer to one question. Ask it. The background check came back thin. We talked about this. But I've had 2 days to think about how you moved in that room, how you talked to my officers, how you've handled every piece of this situation. She held his gaze across the desk. We're military, not regular service. Something else. I don't see a question there, Mason said. Are you currently working for or affiliated with any federal agency or contractor? Were you within the last 5 years? No. Are there individuals connected to your past who have an interest in this situation? He thought about Ray Colton's 4 unanswered calls. The flag on his name that still apparently existed in some database somewhere. There are people from my past who are aware of this situation, he said. Buddy has an operational interest in it. She studied him. Whatever she was looking for in his face, she either found it or decided she wasn't going to. All right, she said. All right, she closed the folder. One more thing, she said. The Forsyth complaint. He filed a motion yesterday afternoon to compel production of your employment history and residential history for the past 15 years. Okafor will get the paperwork today. Mason nodded slowly. Forsyth knows the background is thin, he said. Forsyth knows the background is thin, and he's gambling that whatever's behind it is something you don't want in a courtroom. She looked at him directly. Is he right? A moment, not for the reasons he thinks, Mason said. That's the most carefully worded answer I've received since I made detective. I'm not trying to be difficult. I know, she stood, extended her hand. I'm going to need whatever Okafor needs. I'm going to need you to stay available and stay quiet. Don't talk to the press. Don't post anything anywhere. Don't respond to any further communications from unknown numbers. Move, he shook her hand. Detective, he said. Crane pushes harder, then I'll deal with Crane. You sure about that? She looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same neighborhood. Mr. Hale, I've been sure about harder things than Aldous Crane. She opened the office door. I'll be in touch. He called Okafor from the parking lot. She already had the Forsyth motion. It's a fishing expedition, she said. He doesn't know what he's looking for. He's hoping to find something embarrassing or something he can misrepresent as embarrassing. Can he compel the employment records? He can compel production of records that exist. If records don't exist, or exist in a form that requires federal clearance to access, that's a different question. She was quiet for a moment. Mason, I need to know what we're working with before I respond to this motion. Because if I say the records are classified and he pushes, this goes federal, and it goes bigger than Coldwater Ridge. And if the records aren't technically classified, but just absent because of how your service was structured, I need to know that too, because I argue that differently. He sat in the truck. A cloud passed over the parking lot and the light went flat. I was a Navy SEAL, he said, active from 2004 to 2015. 11 years. My last 3 deployments are classified at a level that Forsyth can't access through civil discovery. My separation was voluntary and honorable. A long pause. Why isn't that in your record? She said. It is in a record. One that's visible to a routine background check. It exists. Yes. Can you get documentation of your service? Will it show what you did? Or just that you served? It'll show that I served. The specifics of certain operations will remain redacted. Pause. Okay, she said. That's actually manageable. It's not ideal. We'd prefer a clean record to wave in Forsyth's face, but a redacted federal service record is a completely different animal than an absent one. It tells a story that doesn't involve you being evasive. It involves you having served in a capacity that the federal government chose to keep private. She thought aloud for a moment. We produce the unredacted portions of the service record. We invoke federal privilege on the rest. Forsyth can fight it if he wants, but fighting a federal privilege claim in a civil tort in a Montana county court is going to cost him more than it costs us, and whoever's paying his bill will notice that. I wasn't told that. You were just told that Forsyth's bill isn't being paid by Travis Kane. I was told that Kane's current legal fees are being covered by a third-party arrangement, which is standard enough that it doesn't raise flags by itself. A beat. But the billings firm Forsyth does do a considerable amount of real estate and land use work in Coldwater Ridge County, which I noticed when I looked them up. You've been busy, Mason said. That's what retainers are for. He leaned back in the seat. What does it look like from here? He said. From here? If Reyes's investigation into Kane holds, and it sounds like she's not inclined to let it be buried, the civil complaint against you becomes harder to maintain. Kane's credibility as a complaining party collapses if he's simultaneously under department investigation for excessive force. Forsyth knows this. He's trying to move fast before the Kane situation matures. She paused. The article in the Courier is concerning, but it's also arguably defamatory. We could send a letter. Not yet. Why? Because sending a letter escalates. Right now, Merritt is applying pressure through deniable channels. I want to see how long he sustains that before he makes a move that's visible. Okafor was quiet. That's a sophisticated read of the situation, she said. For a maintenance worker. He didn't respond. All right, she said. We wait on the letter, but I'm drafting it. A pause. Get me the service documentation by end of week. Whatever you can get your hands on through official channels. I'll make a call. I don't need to know to whom, he said. You don't. Ray got him the documentation in 36 hours. Packet arrived via FedEx at Okafor's office address on Friday morning. Mason had given Ray the address on the phone without explanation, and Ray had not asked for one. Packet contained a DD-214 and a partially redacted service summary on official Department of Defense letterhead, with a cover note in plain language explaining that the redacted portions fell under operational security provisions not subject to civil discovery. Mason picked up a copy from Okafor's office Friday afternoon. He sat in the truck in the parking lot and read through it. His name, his service dates, his rank Chief Petty Officer E7, which was the grade he'd held at separation. His awards, some of them. His discharge characterization, honorable. The rest was black bars and the letter of the law. He hadn't seen his own DD 214 in 4 years. He read it twice. He put it back in the envelope and drove home. Lily had a play date after school, a girl named Sophie, whose mother was reliable about pickup times, which meant Mason had the house until 4:30. He used the time to do the things the week had displaced. Laundry. The bathroom faucet he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, he finally fixed it. A 20-minute job that required a new washer and nothing else, the kind of task that accumulates in your head as larger than it is until you simply do it. He swept the porch. He took the trash to the curb. He sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that he actually drank while it was still hot, which felt like an achievement, and he looked at the drawing still taped to the refrigerator. The lopsided house, the 2 figures, the yellow circle. Phone buzzed. Okafor. The documentation is good, she said. Better than I expected, actually. The DOD letterhead on the privilege claim is going to give Forsyth a headache. She sounded, for the first time, like someone whose hand was improving. I've also heard from a contact at the county courthouse that Forsyth requested a status call with the judge on the civil case for next Thursday. That's faster than expected, meaning he wants to move before something changes. That's my read, which means something is changing. She paused. Reyes is moving faster than I think Merritt anticipated. He misjudged her. Most people misjudge people like her. A pause that held something unspoken. You didn't. I've met people like her before. Where? Work, he said. Okafor let that sit. There's something else, she said. I got a call this morning from a woman named Carol Weston. She didn't contact me through a referral. She found my name through the Courier article. Of all things, she said she wanted to speak to whoever was representing the man from the article. Who is she? Parent. Her son was in Kane's class 14 months ago. She pulled him after Kane dislocated the boy's elbow during a sparring drill and told them it was the boy's fault for not defending himself properly. Her voice was careful and even. She filed an internal complaint with Blackridge Community Center. Nothing happened. She didn't push it further because a pause, she was advised by someone in Kane's circle that pursuing it would create problems for her professionally. She's a county employee, administrative staff, zoning office. Mason set his coffee down. The zoning office, he said. You see it. Merritt's land use projects go through the zoning office. They do. She didn't name anyone specifically, but she was told her words that some situations are better left alone in a town this size. Kitchen was very quiet. She wants to give a statement, Okafor said. To Reyes, to whoever needs it. She said she's done leaving it alone. A brief pause. Secteen. She sounded like a woman who'd been holding something for a year and a half and was tired of the wait. Mason understood that particular kind of tired. Tell her to call Reyes directly, he said. Okafor, tell her the investigation is already open. She's not starting something. She's adding to something that's already moving. I'll tell her. A beat. This changes the shape. A second prior complaint with documented intimidation connected to a Merritt interest. That's not a pattern anymore. That's a system. Yeah. Forsyth is not going to like Thursday. No, Mason said. He isn't. He ended the call. Outside, the afternoon light was going the particular pale gold of a Montana October, the kind that hit the front windows at a low angle and turned the kitchen amber for about 20 minutes before it gave up and went gray. Lily would be home in 40 minutes. He thought about Carol Weston, sitting with a complaint for 14 months, watching nothing happen. He thought about Linda Parker in Billings with Owen, waiting. Thought about Reyes behind her glass-walled office with names on a whiteboard she'd half covered when Mason walked in. And he thought about Halverson, sitting across a desk with a folder he wouldn't open, delivering a message from a man who had enough money to make the town's infrastructure bend in his direction. This was the thing about systems. They worked by making the cost of resistance feel personal and specific, your job, your son, your professional life, while the system itself remained abstract and distributed and hard to point at. You couldn't fight a system by looking for the right person to confront. You fought it by making the cost of maintaining it higher than the cost of dismantling it. Merritt was about to find out that he'd underestimated the number of people who were tired of paying. Mason heard the car in the driveway. Sophie's mother, white minivan, right on time. He could see Lily's shape in the back seat before the door even opened. Backpack, both lopsided, pigtail, somehow surviving a full school day. The particular energy of a child who has been sociable for 7 hours and has opinions to download. She came up the porch steps in 2 jumps, opened the door. Hey, Sophie's mom said the Baxter's dog had puppies. That right, 6 of them. She fixed him with a look. That's a lot of puppies. That is a lot of puppies. Just saying. I know what you're saying. I'm not saying it. I'm just providing information. He looked at her. She looked at him. The negotiation, as always, was happening in the space between those 2 looks. As always, he was at a structural disadvantage because she was 9 years old and had absolutely nothing to lose. Set the table, he said. We'll talk about the dog thing later. She dropped her backpack on the floor with a complete indifference to gravity that was the hallmark of her generation and went to get the plates. Mason stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. His right hand was less sore than it had been. His shift was still suspended. His face had been in a newspaper without his name attached. There was a folder on Okafor's desk with his service record in it. Somewhere in this county, Douglas Merritt was making calculations. And somewhere in Billings, a 14-year-old kid was sleeping in his aunt's spare room because someone had sent another kid to threaten him in a parking lot. That was resolved. None of it was clean. But Carol Weston had made a call. And Linda Parker was in Billings with a formally filed complaint and a detective who hadn't blinked when her lieutenant pushed. Okafor was drafting something for Thursday that Forsyth wasn't going to enjoy. Things were moving. Mason was not a man who needed to control the direction of everything. He'd intervened. He had spent enough of his life in environments where the most important skill was not force of will, but the ability to read what was already happening and put yourself in the right position when it came to a head. He could feel it coming to a head. He went to help Lily with the plates. The dog conversation continued through dinner, through dishes, approximately 45 minutes into the evening, before Lily accepted that later was not a synonym for yes, and went to bed without fully conceding the point, which was consistent with her general negotiating style. Mason locked the front door at 9:15, checked the street from the porch empty, idling SUVs, just the street lamp and the cold, and went to bed earlier than usual. He lay on his back and listened to the house settle. Old houses did that. Made sounds that had nothing to do with anything, just the material contracting in the cold, and you either learned to read which sounds meant something and which ones didn't. You spent every night with one eye open. He'd learned that a long time ago, in places less forgiving than a frame house in Coldwater Ridge, Montana. He slept. Thursday came in cold and bright, the kind of clear October morning that looked inviting through glass and punished you the moment you stepped outside. Mason drove Lily to school. The bus was running late, which happened, and on the way back he took the long route past the river, without deciding to. Just found himself there. The water was gray and low and moving slow between the cottonwoods that had gone yellow-gold at the top and held their color the way October always held it, longer than you expected, until one morning you woke up and it was gone. He got home and called Okafor at 8:40. Status call is at 10, she said. Judge Halvard's courtroom. I don't need you there, but I want you reachable. Good. Stay there. What's your read? Forsyth is going to push for an expedited deposition schedule. He wants you in a chair answering questions before Reyes's investigation matures enough to undercut Kane's standing. She paused. I'm going to push back with the service record and the privilege claim and the supplemental filing when we put in about the parking lot incident. I'm also going to note on the record that the complaining party is currently under active department investigation for the conduct that precipitated this entire complaint. Will Halvard care? Halvard is 63 years old, was in the Marine Corps for 8 years before law school, and has tried 2 cases in this county involving DOD privilege claims. He will care. A short pause. He's not the problem. Problem is whether Forsyth has already worked an angle I haven't anticipated. Do you think he has? I think he's capable. I don't think he has the information to work one. She was quiet for a moment. Mason, Whatever comes out of today, I need you to be prepared for this to get more public before it gets less public. If Halvard rules in our favor on the privilege claim, Forsyth will go to the press with whatever version of your background he can construct from the edges of what he's seen. That means more articles, more unnamed sources. I can handle public. Lily can't. He stood at the kitchen window. The drawing was still on the refrigerator. Yellow circle, 2 figures, lopsided chimney. What are you saying? He said. I'm saying I have a plan for how you talk to your daughter about the possibility that her father's name ends up in a news article. A vague one. A pause. She has friends. Friends have parents. Parents read things. He hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms. He thought about it now. Okay, she said. I'll call you after the status conference. She called at 11:50. Halvard denied Forsyth's deposition motion, she said, with something in her voice that was not quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. He reviewed the service documentation, accepted the federal privilege claim on the redacted portions, and ruled that a discovery timeline applies. Expedited schedule. That's good. It's better than good. Halvard also noted on the record that the existence of an active department investigation into the complaining party represents a material circumstance the court would monitor. He didn't say it in a way that prejudges anything, but he said it clearly enough that Forsyth heard it. A brief pause. Forsyth was not happy. How unhappy. He asked for a recess and spent 12 minutes on his phone in the hallway. Tells me he was reporting back to whoever is directing this. Still can't confirm that name. You don't need to. She allowed a small silence that served as confirmation. Where does it go from here? Mason said. Forsyth has options, but they're all more expensive and less certain than what he had this morning. He can maintain the complaint and fight it through standard discovery, which is going to take 6 to 8 months and cost significantly more than a civil settlement over a gym incident is worth, unless there's a motivation other than the money. She paused. Or he reassesses and finds a way to withdraw gracefully, which happens when the person writing the check decides the return isn't worth the cost. That's the analysis, yes. Mason poured himself a glass of water he didn't particularly want and drank half of it. The investigation into Kane, he said. Reyes, separate track. I don't control that, and neither do you. But Carol Weston gave her statement yesterday. In person, recorded, with documentation of the original complaint she filed 18 months ago. Okafor's voice was measured, but something in it had shifted, had become slightly less professional and slightly more human. Reyes also pulled Kane's financial records related to the studio operation as part of the investigation. Some of what she found apparently involves how the business was set up, specifically who holds the underlying lease on the studio space. Mason put the glass down. Merritt, he said. A real estate holding company associated with his family trust, which means Kane's studio wasn't just supported by Merritt's money. It was operationally dependent on it. She paused. Makes Merritt a material party to any litigation involving Kane's conduct. His attorney will know that by end of day. The kitchen was quiet. That changes his exposure, Mason said, significantly. Right now he's applying pressure through deniable channels. The moment his name appears in a court filing connected to Kane's pattern of behavior, those channels become a lot less deniable. He's going to pull back. I think he's going to make a calculation, Okafor said. Yes, he'd intervened, and I think that calculation is going to come out differently than the one he made the night he first started making calls. Mason stood at the window. Outside, the morning had gone from clear to partly cloudy, the kind of high, thin clouds that cut to the light without blocking it. The street was quiet in the way that ordinary streets are quite quiet on ordinary Thursday mornings, which was to say, entirely. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Nothing is resolved. But thank you, a pause. You're an unusual client, Mason, she said. How so? Most people in your position are either frantic or in denial. You're neither, a beat. It's either very healthy or very concerning, and I haven't decided which. Probably somewhere in the middle, he said. Probably, she agreed. I'll be in touch. Reyes called Friday morning, from her office number, from her cell, which was new. You have a minute, she said. Yes. In person, not the station. There's a place on Forest Street, coffee shop, Marin's. I know it. Noon. He was there at 11:55. She was already at a corner she hadn't touched, and a folder she had touched considerably, judging by the state of it. Place was half full locals, mostly retired and the self-employed, people who could afford to sit in a coffee shop on a Friday without explanation. He'd eat teens. She looked like someone who had not slept well, but was functional in the way of people who have built sleep deprivation into their operating standard. Kane's being charged, she said when he sat down. Formally. We filed this morning. 3 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor. 2 counts of criminal intimidation that's Owen and Carol Weston's son. Conspiracy to intimidate a witness pending. She said it flat, like reading a grocery list. But her eyes were different. Mason was quiet. He turned himself in at 9 a.m., she said. Forsyth was with him, which tells you they knew it was coming. They had time to prepare. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He's out on bail as of an hour ago. Terms include no contact with any former students. And the civil complaint against me? Forsyth filed a motion to voluntarily withdraw it. At 8:45 a.m., she looked at him steadily. 15 minutes before Kane turned himself in. Mason absorbed that. They knew the charges were coming, he said. So they cut the civil complaint before it became part of the same public record as the criminal case. That's how I read it. Or trying to be. It doesn't work legally. The timing creates its own record. But it was the smart move if you're trying to limit surface area. She finally drank some of the coffee. Okafor will get the official notice by end of day. The complaint against you is over. He sat with that for a moment. Complaint against you is over. 7 words that should have felt like something enormous, and mostly felt like the removal of a weight he'd been carrying at a steady enough pace that he'd stopped noticing how heavy it was. Douglas Merritt, he said. She set the cup down carefully. Charges, she said, at this time. Each of those last 3 words was its own sentence. The holding company's role in the studio lease is documented. His name is in the investigative file. Whether the DA pursues the intimidation conspiracy angle all the way to the source depends on what Kane's attorney does next, and whether Kane himself decides that loyalty to his uncle is worth what he's currently facing. You think Kane talks? I think Kane is 32 years old and is looking at criminal charges that could follow him for the rest of his professional life. I think Merritt is 71 and has lawyers who have been managing his interests for decades. She looked at him. I think loyalty has a price, and I think that price goes up considerably when your own name is on the charging document. So you wait. We wait. She paused. Merritt is aware of his exposure. We have his name in the file. The pressure he's been applying, the calls to Crane, the article, the rest of it that stops. Because every additional action now creates additional evidence. She met his eyes. He's smart enough to know that. He is, which means he goes quiet. Which is not justice exactly, but it's containment. She held his gaze. I want you to understand that I know the difference, and I'm not satisfied with containment as an outcome. It's what you have right now. It's what I have right now, she said. He nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the coffee shop moved in its ordinary rhythms, a couple near the window sharing a pastry, a man with a laptop, doing something that required him to frown, teenager behind the counter, restocking cups without paying attention to his hands. Your job, Reyes said. Halverson called me this morning, separately. He wanted to know if the department had any outstanding concerns about your presence at the community center. What did you tell him? I told him the department had no outstanding concerns. Mason looked at her. He's going to call you, she said. Probably this afternoon. Okay. He's going to apologize in the way that administrators apologize, which is to say indirectly and with institutional language, and you're going to have to decide whether you care. I don't particularly, I know. She almost smiled. But your job back is your job back. He looked at the table, at her coffee cup with its half-moon ring on the saucer, scratched wood surface that had been there in Zond, long enough to have character. Thank you, he said, for not letting it get buried. I was doing my job. People doing their jobs let it get buried twice before I walked into that room. She was quiet, not uncomfortable with the statement, just giving it its proper weight. I know that, she said. I know you know. She picked up her folder. Dude, one more thing, she said. Off the record. Completely, go ahead. The flag on your name in the federal system. She said it without looking at him directly, which was the only way you said a thing like that in a coffee shop in a small town. It's not the kind of flag that makes people nervous, kind that makes people careful. She glanced at him. Whatever you did, wherever you did it, it's viewed favorably by people whose view of things I've come to trust. He held her gaze. I appreciate you telling me that, he said. She nodded once, picked up her coffee, left a 5 on the table. Stay out of trouble, Mr. Hale, she said. I'll do my best, he said. She walked out. Through the window, he watched her cross the street, get into a plain department sedan, and drive away without looking back. Halvorsen called at 2:17. He apologized in the way Reyes had predicted: institutional language, liability frameworks, the board's position, procedural necessity. Mason listened to all of it without interrupting. When it was done, he said he understood. He said he'd be back Thursday for his regular shift. Halvorsen said he'd make sure his access card was reactivated, was the whole conversation. Mason put the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a moment. He got his jacket and drove to Billings. He hadn't told Linda Parker he was coming. He'd gotten the address from Reyes, who had given it to him with a look that said she wasn't technically supposed to do that and was doing it anyway, and he drove the 2 hours to Billings with the heat set to the one temperature that almost compensated for the broken blend door and a country station on the radio that he listened to without really hearing. Pulled up to a house in a residential neighborhood east of downtown Linda's sister's place, a brick ranch with a minivan in the driveway and a basketball hoop mounted above the garage that had been there long enough to rust at the bracket. He sat in the truck for a moment. Then he got out and knocked. Linda Parker answered. She looked better than he expected and worse than she would have wanted to. The compressed, managed quality of someone who had been in survival mode for 2 weeks and was only now beginning to believe she could come down from it. She looked at him for a moment. You drove 2 hours, she said. You could have called. I know. She stepped back from the door. He came inside. The house smelled like someone else's cooking garlic and something sweet, a sister's kitchen, familiar in the way that borrowed spaces are familiar. He could hear a television in another room. Somewhere a door. Owen appeared in the hallway. He'd groaned, or seemed to have grown, which was impossible in 2 weeks, but was the impression that came from seeing someone who'd been scared and small in a gym, and was now standing in a hallway in his socks, a little more upright, confident, not repaired, just slightly less braced. Hey, Mason said. Hey, Owen said. Linda was behind Mason. She didn't go anywhere. The charges against Kane were filed this morning, Mason said. He was talking to Owen. The complaint against me was dropped. The investigation is ongoing. He kept it simple. It's not over completely. These things take time, but it's moving the right direction. And was looking at him. Is he going to jail? He said. Mason said. That's for a judge and jury, but he's been charged. Formally. That means it's on record. It means it happened. Owen was quiet. The other kids in his class, Owen said. Some of them never said anything. Some of them might still. What if they don't? Then what you said is still true. And what Carol Weston said is still true. And what happened to you is documented in a place where it can't be erased. Mason looked at him steadily. That's not everything. But it's not nothing. Owen looked at the floor. Then back up. He used to say that if we couldn't take it in the gym, we couldn't take it anywhere, Owen said. Like being afraid was a character flaw. Being afraid is information, Mason said. What you do with it is character. Owen was quiet for a moment. Is that something they teach you in the military? He said. Mason looked at him. In his peripheral vision, he felt Linda go still. Where'd you hear that? Mason said. People talk, Owen said. 14-year-old shrug. Small town, a moment. Yeah, Mason said. Something like that. Owen nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they're putting something in a place to think about later. I'm not going back to Coldwater Ridge right away, Owen said. Mom says maybe another week. That's fine, Mason said. Take the time. Will it actually be fine when we go back? Honest question. Deserved an honest answer. Probably mostly fine, Mason said. Probably some things will still be uncomfortable for a while. People talk, like you said. Some of them will have opinions. He paused. The thing that was happening to you there is over. That part is done. Owen looked at him. How do you know? He said. Because the thing that was allowing it to happen has been pulled into the light, Mason said. And things like that don't survive the light as well as they survive the dark. The hallway was quiet. The television murmured in the other room. The basketball hoop outside rattled faintly in a wind neither of them could hear from inside. Nodded again. Disappeared back down the hallway. Linda walked Mason to the door. She stood on the threshold with her arms crossed, not cold-crossed, just the body language of a woman who had been holding herself together through force of will for 2 weeks and was still not entirely ready to stop. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know. Why did you?" He thought about it. "Because he asked me a question I couldn't answer over the phone," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face moved. "He's going to be okay," she said, not asking, deciding. Mason said. "He is," she nodded. Didn't hug him. They weren't people who hugged. Neither of them. Yes, with each other. Yet, but she held the door open until he was down the porch steps and at the truck, and she was still there when he looked back. He raised one hand. She raised hers. He drove home. The drive back took a little over 2 hours. He stopped once at a gas station outside of town for coffee from a machine that tasted like it had been brewed sometime around the previous administration, but was hot, which was sufficient. He drank it in the parking lot with the engine running and the radio off, and the flat dark of a Montana October evening all around him. He thought about Ray Colton, who had called 4 times in one morning because a flag on a name in a federal database had lit up, and Ray, being Ray, had made it his business. He thought about how much of his life still existed in systems he couldn't see. Noke, attached to a version of himself that lived in classified files and redacted documents, and the memories of people who had been in certain places at certain times. Version of him wasn't gone. You didn't train for years and deploy and do the things he'd done and then put it in a box and close the lid. It was still as in his hands. Still in the way he read a room, read a face, read the sound of a car pulling to the curb outside a house at night. But it wasn't the governing version. Hadn't been for 11 years. Thought about Lily, who would be at Mrs. Garland's right now, probably showing the old woman something on her tablet, or asking her questions about things that only Lily found urgent at 9 years old. He'd intervened. He thought about her pigtails and her opinion about crusts and her taxonomy of his facial expressions, which was apparently more sophisticated than he'd given her credit for. Thought about the drawing on the refrigerator. He finished the coffee, started the truck, drove the rest of the way home in the dark. 3 weeks later, the studio at Blackridge Community Center was empty. Kane had cleared it in 2 trips on a Tuesday, which Mason knew because he had been back on shift for 2 weeks by then and he worked Tuesdays. He'd watched from the corridor as Kane loaded the last boxes into his car, not the late model SUV that had presumably gone back to whoever it belonged to, but a 10-year-old Accord with a dented rear quarter panel. Assistants. No students. No performance. He looked smaller than Mason remembered. He loaded the last box, closed the trunk, and looked up. Saw Mason in the corridor window. Mason didn't move, didn't look away, didn't do anything. Kane looked at him for a moment. His face was difficult to read, not because it was controlled, but because there was less in it than there used to be. The theater had gone out of it. He got in the car and drove away in the rain. Mason watched until the taillights were gone. Then he picked up his mop and finished the corridor. County Planning Board accepted Douglas Merritt's resignation from his seat in November. The official statement cited personal reasons and a desire to focus on private interests. Charges were filed. His attorney released a 2-paragraph statement that said nothing, in the particular way that careful attorneys say nothing. Travis Kane pled no contest to 2 of the 3 charges in January. Sentenced to 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a lifetime bar from working with minors in any professional capacity in the state of Montana. The 3rd charge was dropped as part of the plea. He paid restitution to Carol Weston's family and to the Parkers. The Billings attorney Dale Forsyth's firm stopped taking cases in Coldwater Ridge County the following year. He made an announcement about it. Reyes made lieutenant in the spring. Mason read it in the Courier, the same paper that had run the article about unverified backgrounds in a brief paragraph on the 3rd page. He cut it out and put it on the refrigerator next to Lily's drawing. Lily noticed who she said. "Someone I know," he said. She did a good job. Lily looked at the photograph in the article, Reyes in her dress uniform, hand extended for a shake. She looks serious, Lily said. She is serious. Is that why she did a good job? That's part of it, Mason said. Lily accepted that and went back to her homework. Owen Parker came back to Coldwater Ridge in November. He didn't return to any martial arts class. He found a track coach at the high school who let him train with the team, even though he was still in middle school. He was fast, not the fastest kid on the team. Fast enough, and getting faster. The coach said he had the kind of build that would develop over the next 2 years into something that could compete at the district level. Yes, he'd intervened. Mason heard this from Linda Parker, who had come by the community center one evening to pick up a flyer about a cooking class and had seen him mopping the lobby and stopped. He's doing well, she said. Good. He asked about you once, whether you were still here. What did you tell him? I told him you were, that you worked nights. She paused. He said that made sense. I asked him what he meant. He said she stopped, and something in her face was soft around the edges for a moment. He said some people do better work in the dark. Mason looked at her. He's a perceptive kid, he said. He is. She shifted the flyer in her hands. He's also been working on not letting fear make his decisions. Told me that was something someone told him. She looked at him. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, the way teenagers say things they actually care about, so they don't have to admit they care. Mason nodded. Tell him I said good, he said. I will. The lobby was quiet. The HVAC hummed overhead. Down the corridor, Studio B was dark. It had been released to a yoga instructor who came in Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, a quiet woman named Bev who brought her own mat and always said hello and never needed anything. Mason pushed the cart down the corridor. Started at the east end the way he always started. Bathrooms first, then the lobby tile, then the gymnasium floor if it needed it. Work west slow and methodical. 6 hours, no reason to rush. The fluorescent tube in the second hallway had been flickering for a week. He'd put in the work order 3 days ago, and the part was supposed to come in on Friday. He made a note to follow up on it. He mopped past Studio B. The door was closed. Dark inside, the mat rolled up against the wall the way Bev always left it. He kept moving. At 3 a.m., he finished the last corridor, rinsed the mop bucket, stowed the cart, and came out the side door into the cold. Lily was not waiting for him. She was home asleep, 9 years old, and that was exactly where she should be. He'd be home before she was up. Make breakfast, pack the lunch, put it in the bag she'd picked out herself at the beginning of the school year, a navy one with a small white star on the front that she'd chosen because she said stars were better than planets because planets were just rocks, and stars were actually doing something. He got in the truck, started it, drove home through the empty, cold, honest dark of a small Montana town that was mostly what it appeared to be, and had been, for the most part, worth the trouble. Real strength isn't measured in the number of people who fear you. It's measured in the number of people who were afraid until you showed up.